Now we're moving on to the next panel, privacy and the new president. As you can hear from my accent, I'm particularly very excited to hear what those ladies are going to be talking about and what's going to happen during the next 4 years for this country and some other countries as well. So I would like you to meet the moderator, Sheera Frenkel. She's a cybersecurity correspondent at BuzzFeed. And please meet Heather West from Mozilla. Please carry on, ladies.
So as we were getting ready to do this panel, one of the things that came up was that we're only 6 days into this administration. And a lot of what we're going to be discussing today is guesswork about what the Trump administration is going to do vis-a-vis cybersecurity policy. One of the few things that we do know so far is his position on encryption and backdoors. It was one of the few sort of strong stances I think he took on cybersecurity during the campaign. And given his just initial appointments with Jeff Sessions and his decision to keep Comey in the FBI, we know that this is an administration that has taken quite a positive view of backdoors to encryption policy, and which will potentially lead to a head-to-head fight with Silicon Valley on this issue. So, Heather, do you want to start?
Sure. This is an ongoing discussion, kind of talking about the difference between privacy and the needs of law enforcement, and has been, pretty hot for, I can now declare it to be several decades. Initially coming up during the Clinton administration and kind of dying down a little bit. And then in the last couple of years, Washington, D.C., as well as a lot of other, global governments have been talking about, wait a second, should I be able to get into your iPhone? Wait a second, should I be able to read your email? But what if you have a secure messaging app? Is that okay? What if I need to get into that? And so there's been an ongoing discussion, and it is, as you noted, one of the very few places that Trump had a concrete cybersecurity position. He admitted on the campaign that, the tech world was not as familiar to him. It's just not where he lives. And sometimes when you're less familiar with the technology, it's harder to kind of conceptualize the impacts of things like encryption policy, which is obscure, wonky, and technical at best.
Right, or to take the position that there was some kind of gray area where you could have a partial encryption or encryption in some ways and not others, or backdoors in some situations and not others. And what we've seen as a result is sort of a very murky policy on this. Him saying, well, I'll boycott Apple and they should give the FBI access when they need it, but I want everything really secure. And out here, that's seen as an incredibly confusing position because there's no real technological solution for that.
Yeah, and from a technological perspective, it seems like a contradiction in terms. If I'm a consumer, I want my phone to be secure. I'd like my email to be secure. I want all of these services that I use to have the strongest possible security. I want Mozilla to keep building a secure browser. I want, all of this data that we put out in the world to be secure, because if it's not secure, we're going to have a lot of trouble getting to that privacy end. So I think that there's going to be a huge discussion that way, and I hope that we can, there's been some really great progress. At the end of last year, the House Encryption Working Group put out a report that was actually really fantastic and just said anything weakening encryption is bad for national security. And so I'm hoping that we can rewind a little bit and start discussing in this new administration, how do we balance those important things? Because I think that a lot of people in this discussion have prioritized one over the other almost by default, as opposed to really sitting down and figuring out, all right, if my iPhone is backdoored, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? So, I think, encryption from our perspective at Mozilla is a fundamental technology behind the internet. And as such, we want to protect it. I'm hoping that the incoming administration is willing to have that discussion. I know that they kind of started to have it with some of the technology companies post-election, but it needs to be an ongoing dialogue. But for example, the incoming Secretary of Commerce department has said that he needs to have that conversation with technology companies, and that's the kind of statement that really gives me some appreciation and hope that we can make some progress on that.
And as you said, this is something that has started, or didn't quite start, it started decades ago, but really came to light in the last administration. Many Americans only became aware of the debate between encryption and backdoors because of the Apple versus FBI fight. Now, the Obama administration, despite now quite a few people out here in Silicon Valley looking back with nostalgia and hope, some of the policies the Obama administration took towards them, did start a lot of the you know, a lot of things that people are most concerned about now started under Obama. In his last few weeks in office, he greatly expanded the ability of the NSA to share metadata and to share with other intelligence agencies. National security letters were greatly expanded under his administration. I mean, this is not an issue that's starting with Trump, is it?
Not at all. And actually, so in the last days of his administration, President Obama expanded and changed some definitions. You can debate a little bit how intelligence is shared between agencies under something called Executive Order 12333. Welcome to DC. We only talk in acronyms. Acronyms and numbers and codes and sections, it's bad. But one of the interesting things about that, you know, it's a fundamental intelligence gathering order that Reagan signed into force, and it's actually an interesting demonstration that these orders, all of this policy, takes a long time to implement. There are similar orders and directives from the Bush administration that took 8-10 years, you know, to figure out how the government wanted to work with industry around vulnerability disclosure and making sure that these services were secure and working the way that we designed them to. You know, this is going to, there's going to be a long wait to see exactly what happens. I, you know, earlier today sent an email saying, so what happens next? I don't know. There's going to be a lot, you know, there's going to be a lot of speculation, but it's going to take us some time to figure out how this all gets implemented.
And something else that's going to be carried over from the last administration is the toss-up between surveillance and privacy and where that goes next. That's something a lot of Americans are asking themselves as they look towards this new administration and say, well, there are people we see advising President Trump on things like facial recognition, greater surveillance of American cities and the American public. And what is going to be the toss-up here between the surveillance positions taken by the Trump administration and safeguarding Americans' privacy?
You know, that's a balancing act that I don't think is ever going to go away. It's always going to be one of those things, how do we do it right? And I think we can get closer and closer to doing it right, but I'm not sure that there's ever going to be a fix there. You know, I think it's interesting to me because a lot of people are talking about this administration with a great amount of fear when it comes to privacy and surveillance. You know, and while I'm really glad that this has brought, you know, awareness and people are thinking about the technology and how it impacts their data and their privacy, you know, I think that we should have been thinking about this all along, and some folks were, you know, but the better the privacy and security of our services, our devices, of the internet, you know, we will keep building on that. And I'm hopeful that all of these tools, you know, technology companies have, you know, the onus of really figuring out how do we build these tools in a way that respects our users, that gives them what they need. And part of that is thinking about data privacy and thinking about data security.
I mean, out here in San Francisco, I just know that in the weeks since Trump was elected, or months rather, quite a few people who work for technology companies have been raising that with reporters and saying to us, we have concerns here within the companies. We don't know what to do next. We possibly have waited too long to ask questions about where we keep our data, how much data we store on our customers, for how long we should be keeping all this data. But they're asking it now, and there have been policies raised that have forced them to ask it in a more relevant and perhaps a more pressurized environment.
And I'm glad we're asking the questions. You know, at some level, don't care a lot about why. Let's ask the questions. Let's come up with the right answers. And really, you know, one of the things that I appreciate about this discussion is while we're talking about the election of a government official, you know, that's going to inform our discussion of how we store consumer data as an industry, how we treat our users and what our responsibilities are. I think it's actually a really fantastic thing that there are folks in the tech industry who are stepping back and saying, wait a second, I'm not just building a technology, I'm responsible to my users, and this is something that I need to do right.
Better late than never.
Absolutely.
And I think the last thing we wanted to touch on was the Privacy Shield, some news from today.
Yeah, so this may get a little bit wonky. I apologize in advance. We'll see how many we can do in 3 minutes. Trump signed an immigration-related executive order yesterday that had a small provision buried in the text that basically says, when you're implementing Privacy Act rules, non-US persons don't count. Which, under the Privacy Act, there is no legal protections for non-US persons, but there are a lot of agencies, including DHS, who enforces immigration stuff, as well as intelligence agencies and others, who have decided that Privacy Act rules should apply to everyone. Everyone in their databases. And so it's actually a very interesting thing because this Privacy Shield agreement between the US and EU is one of several kind of structures and agreements that we've been working out to make sure that data transfers across the ocean are safe and protected. Privacy is protected, but also, all of this commercial business keeps happening. And that's data like an advertising profile all the way to employee data, or anything else. If Europe looks at this order and says this administration is going to fundamentally downgrade the privacy of EU citizens, that's the kind of move that could really impact something like Privacy Shield. And this was in fact the subject. I don't know what's going to happen. It's really unclear, and it's going to depend on a lot of implementation.
And it starts with the EU, but presumably other countries are going to be looking at this as well and saying, is the data, is the information of our citizens safe in the hands of U.S. companies now?
Absolutely. There's 27 countries that the Department of Justice has designated as countries that we have particular data privacy agreements with. And off the top of my head, I can't name many of them. But those are countries that we want to support good policy and good privacy protections globally. I think that undermining that would be a mistake. Now, again, that is who knows what happens next.
Right. Great. I think
it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I do hope that Silicon Valley and everyone else who's interested kind of keeps paying attention and keeps thinking, wait a second, what's the right thing to do here? What's my responsibility? How do I help? And make sure that we take the privacy world, the data world, the internet back, take it in the right direction.
Right, and it feels like we're at a time right now of quite a frantic news cycle where each day the sort of story you would see headline a story in one day, you get 10 of those. And I think there's a lot of companies that are waiting and saying, okay, hold on, there's these executive orders. We're hearing a lot of sort of chaotic and possibly inflammatory language around these executive orders. Let's wait and see what actually gets legislated.
Well, and I think that hopefully consumers are reading these stories, and yes, there's a lot of them, and saying, wait a second, two-factor authentication, that's a thing I should use. Oh, wait, password, I should have a strong password. And starting to really use all of the technologies that are built for their protection that may have seemed, like they didn't really care, but they didn't see the concrete, value of them. If we can help use this as a moment for education, that would make me perfectly happy.
Right, it seems like one of the few positives that have come of this is that companies that do have strong authentication, strong encryption, have seen a huge boost in their sales, a huge boost in their downloads. I don't remember, but I think Signal was one of the companies that saw a 300% increase in downloads in just the first week after Trump won the election. So for better or worse, people are taking their privacy more seriously.
I think that is for better.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.